Hello everyone, and I'm realizing that here in your final interpretive paper, there was some questions about the final piece. So I think the easiest thing to do here is to go over that final piece. I posted last night in Facebook. Basically, the question was, let me find the thing. It was the dynamics happening about GGW questions, and so the final interpretive paper. Did we put that in? Well, I cut and pasted what the final interpretive paper was, and I'm just going to put it up here. No, not that. Well, I do have it. There it is. So this was 5.3, the final interpretive paper. Don't pay attention to these numbers. I tried to delete all of them, and then it did that. So these were the 7 or so things, and we got an issue that many of you are emailing me about for good reason on this final part where it says a completed word study from your passage following the requirements of assignment 5.2. Now, if you recall, for those of you that haven't caught this yet, if you go back to 5.2, this assignment 5.2 word study, this is back in the week 5 folder, if you haven't noticed. The word study worksheet, that word study worksheet for 5.2 had you do this, right? So when you get to this and you're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to do 5.2 just like I did 3.1 and 4.1 and so forth. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, okay, for this assignment, remember you had to go back to assignment, you had to go to your Grasping God's Word book, and it had assignment 9.1 that had 11 questions in total. But it was specifically about a couple passages. One of you, just to remind you, let me just open that up real quick because one of you even posted on Facebook. Okay, everybody, be ready. Actually, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna move Facebook down here, find it, and then open it. So, one of you had mentioned, I think it was Sarah Bishop, and had posted a question, a good question, to me. So let me see if I can find where I answered that. Oh, come on now, where is it? She posted a picture of 9.1, and since that was a good way to show you guys where it is, I think I'm going to find it now. Thank you for your patience. Here it is, and it's kind of sideways, but at least you can see it. Okay, Sarah posted, and I know it's sideways, but that's that 9.1 concordance exercises from Grasping God's Word, and it had, look how I'm reading sideways because you guys are going to have to. Remember I had these questions about Acts 1.8 and the word translated power in Acts 1.8, and then it had the word translated power in Exodus 4.21, and these questions, right? So obviously when you're doing this assignment, those things don't make sense, do they? For if you were doing Romans, let's say, as your passage, all of a sudden you're like, well, how do I do this assignment? Good question. Okay, this is what I'm going to have you do. I redid the questions, those questions I just showed you. And so, oops, not that, sorry. Here it is. I rewrote the questions for you, and these are now the only questions you'll have to do. I posted these questions on Facebook last night. And I will post them in the announcements today as well, and they're obviously in this video. And so these are the core questions you have to answer, right? Use the concordance to answer the questions about your passage. In the book it said about, Acts 1.8 or Exodus. So if you're doing Romans, you would put Romans 12, 1-3 or whatever in there. And then you would say, write out the English transliterated form of the word translated blank, or you choose a word. So, for instance, if you're doing Romans, oops, my mic is falling. Let me just open a passage from Romans really quick, so you can see that. Romans 12, okay. So if you are doing Romans 12, 1 to 3, I think that was one of the passages, right? Let me just double check that was the exact reference. Yeah, 12, 1 to 3. So if you're doing Romans 12, 1 to 3, that would be from here to there, right? Pick one word that you think would be a good word to study. Now, I know I'm giving you a lot of freedom here, which is a little bit scary, and I probably should go through and tell you which word to do. But I'm going to allow you to have some freedom. That'll kind of be an added part of this assignment, that you have to figure out what would be a good word to actually study here. So bad word. I mean, I will mark you terribly if you decide to study the word so you want to find words like usually actionable words, where if the definition changed, it would change the entire meaning, right? So I appeal to you. It doesn't mean it has to be a verb. It just means it has to do, the word you look at, power. That's a significant word. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. Now, transformed could be a word. It's probably be transformed. It's probably the word in Greek. By the renewal of your mind, transformed or renewal could be your word. That by testing would potentially be another word you could do. You may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. So you could also trying to think of another one with judgment, sober judgment could be another word. So those are the types of words you're looking for that doing a word study on them is going to really beef up your understanding and your explanation and your teaching of what that passage is talking about. Okay? So it may also be helpful to find that verse or that phrase in your passage that you are arguing really carries the weight or the big idea of that passage, and try to find a word related to that big idea phrase that will help in the digging out the weight and the meaning of that. Okay, so that's how you find a word. So the idea here is that you choose a word. So write out the English transliterated form of the word translated blank. So you would put the word that is translated blank, whatever word you chose. So if you chose transformed or renewal or something like that, you would put that there, and then you would put your passage there in your passage. How many times does this word occur in the New Testament or Old Testament? So obviously if you're doing an Old Testament passage, you would put in the Old Testament and then look up how many times your word occurs in the Old Testament. If you're doing if you're doing Romans, you'd only do the New Testament. In the original Grasping God's Word book, it had both. It had Acts and Exodus, right? So it had a couple questions on each. So in this case, you're only going to answer it once because you're only choosing one passage from either the Old or New Testament, and then you would answer this question according to whether it was in the Old or New Testament. So again, if you did one of the Proverbs, it'd be Old Testament. If you did a Romans or another New Testament passage, it would be New Testament. List the passages in your passages book. So it would be list the passages in Romans, if you did the Romans 12, 1 to 3, that translate the word renewal or something, if that was your word. That's how you would fill in this. So then you would say on this question, list the passages in Romans that translate the word as another translation. So again, for sake of example, let's go back to Romans really quick. I just want to be super clear on this. So let's say you did transformed, be transformed, right, as your word. Okay. Now, what you would do here, obviously, you would fill in this part would be transformed, right, in your passage, which is Romans 12, 1 to 3, right? how many times does this word occur in the New Testament? And let's just say, obviously you have to go back to the concordance stuff for that. Let's say it's 7 times. I don't know if that's true or not. List the passages in your passages book. So list the passages in Romans, in this example, that translate the word as transformed, because that's how it's translated here, right? List the passages. So that could be, then down here you would list, okay, it's in Romans 3:6, then in 6:7, and then in like 11:4. That's obviously not true, but if it was, that's how it would look. Then list the passages in your passages book, again, Romans, that translate the word as what? So usually a word like transformed may be translated something different in a different way in the New Testament in this case. So what's another word for transformed that it might be? Let's just say some places the word is translated. It's too early in my day to be thinking of these things. Let's just say transformed is translated renewed. That's also in that passage, renewed. Maybe it's the same word. So then you'd list the passage in Romans that translate the word as renewed. So oftentimes a word is translated one way in some places and one way in another place for the context, but it's the same word, and it's important that you know that. So then you would do the same thing, that's in Romans 1:3 and so forth. Now I had this note, there may or may not be one. So it may only be, that's not spelled right, I understand. It may only be translated as transformed, right? So sometimes it's not translated as another word, but oftentimes it is. So if it's not, then you just say it's only translated as transformed. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, in that worksheet, where that original worksheet, where are you? There we go. Remember, it had these green questions, these additional questions. First of all, where it has this clarification on, like, please note that judge may be this or that or this or that. Don't worry about that, obviously, because those little notes are related to the question specifically in grasping God's word on those passages. So you can kind of ignore these things and just, erase them or whatever if you're going to fill in the chart like this. But these things are partially, the questions are still good. These parts are not useful anymore. So I do want you to do these additional questions in green. There's just 4 little ones, right? And it says, what is the Strong's, and this crazy Greek number for this word if it was Romans? So you would look that up, because there's always a Strong's number for the word you're looking up. In this one, it's what other English words are used to render this word. Provide the top 5. So that's we gave you a lot of hints there, but you would erase that. And just like I was saying, how if there was another word translated as transformed, if there was none, you'd put there is none. If there were others, you would list them, 1, 2, 3, or whatever. What are the other words that take that Greek word in Romans 12 and translate it in a different form of transformed? Okay? Then down here, what other English words are used to render this word? So again, this, you don't have to do it twice, because this is because there were 2 different words that you were doing in the grasping God's word one, right? So you can basically erase one of them like this. And so you don't necessarily have to fill in this whole chart. In fact, you can kind of erase this chart and just fill in the questions that I'm going to post online. I'm running out of time here, that's why I'm rushing. So I'm going to post these questions right here, guys, and I'm going to add a couple to them. So just fill in those questions, and then you'll be good to go. So that's it, pretty much, guys. The question down here, in 1 to 2 sentences, explain one thing you've learned. You are going to do that one. but I'm going to post